I like to say agents are hungry for data, and they don't care where it is. They don't care what the governance is. Just give me the data because I got to come up with an answer.
You're listening to It's About Data, episode 41. We're joined by Rick Greenwald and John Rymer to discuss the conflict between data and application development. Okay, this episode we're joined by John Rymer and Rick Greenwald of analysis.tech, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We'll kick things off with Rick. Tell us a bit about your background and your outlook.
Well, my background is the most relevant experience. I was with Gartner for about 10 years as the senior database analyst there. And I joined analysis.tech at the start of this year, bringing kind of a view of the data side of things to a consultancy that is mainly focusing on low code. But we're having a good time, and it's really productive. And we're going to be talking about that more in this podcast. I think that the data centric view of the world and the developer centric view.
Yeah, and this is something I'm very, very familiar with from my data engineering background. It's something that we talk about all the time. So I'll let John kick things off as well, and then we'll get into the point counterpoint on these two perspectives.
Thanks, Matt. As Tony might say, I'm a washed-up analyst, formerly at Forrester. Um, while I was at Forrester, I did some research with a colleague named Clay Richardson, and we concluded, hey, there are these really interesting, productive new development environments out there, kind of son of 4GL. And what are we going to call those things? And we decided to call them low code. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Interesting. Now, why didn't you call it the fifth generation computing project?
Because I had read that book already, Tony.
Exactly.
Anyway, it was done.
Yeah. Anyway, it's really great having a chance to talk with the both of you. This is a very unique opportunity. And really, as Matt was saying here, the theme for this episode is really going to be basically our database and DBAs from Venus and app developers from Mars, or vice versa. You can choose, which one you can choose which one takes which planet. But I think what we'd like to start with, actually, since John, you're on hostile territory, you're surrounded here by three data people. You are really surrounded.
And for once.
Yeah, well, I can see Rick is finally getting it, all those years of frustration with app developers, and so we're gonna really have it out here. So let's just start with the high level question, which is that when developers are approaching a project, how do they tend to view and approach data? And then we'll ask Rick to basically say why you're wrong.
Tony, in a word, how do they approach data? Gimme.
Yeah.
Gimme. I don't care if it's structured data, it comes out of spreadsheets, comes out of SAP, comes out of document stores. Particularly with so many apps now that are being built to bridge different systems and automate processes that bridge different systems. Think of onboarding, for example. It's just I need the data I need to accomplish this automation, goal, whatever it happens to be. And it's really the case when you're talking about people that are front end developers, user experience developers, because that's a big piece of this. I just went to a Microsoft conference focused on Power Platform, and Canvas apps are front and center. That's all UI, and I just give me the data I need to display, and I'll get it any way I can, hook or crook. And if I have to build integration, I'm really unhappy doing it. So that's the short answer.
Rick?
John, you ignorant slut. We knew it was going to come to that sooner or later. It's really interesting, John. When you were talking, a light bulb went off in my head because, as Tony knows, as you know, John, I'm a big nut on data governance. And when I say data governance, I mean making sure the data is correct and timely and consistent and all those things. But it seems like most of the world thinks that data governance is all about security. Okay? They don't even talk about data being correct. But then I realized if you're saying gimme, what I have to do is put some handles around that gimme, put some walls around that gimme.
Yeah.
So developers might think governance is all about security, but as a data guy, that's a very small part of it. I mean, we are responsible data guys for making sure the data is correct. It's funny too, because there's kind of a chain of communication. Developers talk to end users, they get the requirements for what's being done. But at the
Mhm.
same time, the only people who can really specify what governance means, what it means for data to be correct, are also the end users. So database people need to talk to them too. The
Mhm.
other the other thing, which is it's a big frustration because I think a lot of times app developers they're just not very database technology literate. You know,
Yeah.
I mean things like consistency and concurrency with multiple
Mhm.
people using data. I mean, look, if you have an app that only has one person using it, use Excel. Use a piece of paper. I mean, it's all about sharing data. And that frequently means not only sharing between people in one app, but people sharing between multiple apps. And this gets really complicated really fast. And it's a little frustrating because, look, I still remember, oh God, it must be 30 years ago. I was talking to someone about isolation levels and how to protect concurrency with data. And I turned to the guy who was a VP at my company and said, "Is that all I'm ever going to have to know?" The funny thing is, the answer is yes, because I'm, still telling people about that, still trying to get people to understand that. And it's hopefully we're going to move closer with this. And I mean, the same way that developers cannot be domain experts like the end users are, who actually understand the business problems, uh, developers can't be data domain experts and
Yeah.
vice
Yeah.
versa. So there has to be a way to share properly and to work together in ways that don't require, let's just say, excessive communication. It requires
Yeah.
communication, but we want to make sure the right things get done as automatically as possible.
Yeah.
I think the nature of the low code platforms, particularly the ones that are used for very substantial, very mission critical kinds of apps. You think of a Pega or an Appian or a Mendix or an OutSystems, those kinds of products. I think the way that they're structured, Rick, and the facilities they provide are going to bring people together, are going to bring our worlds together, because they all have what are oftentimes called data grids or data fabrics. And essentially, what these things are working stores for the applications that are running on the platform. And very quickly, if you're working at scale, you run into issues of synchronization, refresh rates, concurrency, scale, security, actually, as well. Um, and I think it is going to force our worlds to come together much more closely than they have been in the past.
I mean, I'd love to see that. And I mean, one thing you left out was the things going on in the data world are also very nuanced. You know, um,
Hmm.
the thing that's really frustrating is if you're an app developer in your typical environment, you develop the app, you test it, you load some data, you test it with two or three people. Data problems don't show up for 6 months.
Yep.
And then it's too late to fix it. One thing I'm just screaming about all the time is when you lose data integrity, you can't get it back. I mean, I thought, oh, I'll have a countervailing transaction. Actually, that doesn't work, you know? So all of, and let alone things like when you talk about data grids and all, a lot of times this is going to extend across multiple platforms. And now we get into the issue of distributed concurrency, which is really hard to do. And you have to sacrifice some things in order to get it. And it always takes me back many, many years ago. I was at a Microsoft kind of one of those open sessions where they're teaching people about, and the guy was talking as a developer, and someone was asking a question about three-state logic using nulls. And his answer was, "Oh, they're too complicated. Don't do it." And like the top of my head blew off. Like, it's too complicated. Don't use it. Do you know that's a very useful thing? So, I mean, I don't, I think, we can talk about not understanding domains, but you got to at least dip your foot in the water and understand some of these things,
Yeah.
you know?
And Rick, you dove right into the communications issues here, which I completely agree with. I think traditionally, from the data engineering world, traditionally what happens is app developers generate data. They want to make sure the state of their app is correct and that things are working. And like
For
you said,
them,
John,
for their
for them.
silo. Yeah.
Yes, correct. And that they can get what they want, but they're not interested in downstream or long-term history. And we've always cared about analytics since the 80s. We've cared more and more since the 2000s with big data, with ad tech. But there's still this communication gap. There's still a throw it over the wall attitude like, oh, who cares who consumes it? That is not our problem. Go deal with that yourselves. So John and Rick, how do we change the incentives so that app developers can actually communicate with the data engineers and analytics people and vice versa, so they actually care about each other's domains?
I'm glad you said incentives because that's the problem, Matt. If my job is to deliver an application
Mm-hmm.
and um, and I'm going to be measured on, you know, user acceptance of that application,
Yeah.
utilization of it, yada yada. And you come to me and say, by the way, we want you to spend part of your budget on this project that's going to make the data your application is managing useful, across the world somewhere. I'm like, get lost. I'm not measured on that.
Yeah.
This is a real problem. This has been a problem for decades. Remember
Yeah.
back in the days when the young people listening in will be like, "What's he talking about?" Do you remember SOA, service-oriented
Oh, yeah. Oh,
architecture?
yes.
And
We'll
we're
probably
gonna
still have a
well,
book somewhere around here about that.
somewhere.
John, I took the 12-step program.
So I mean, there were many problems with with that idea and some of the technology behind it, but one of the main problems was this problem of incentives.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to accommodate the shared interests that you're asking me to meet within my budget and my timeline, I've got no incentive. Why would I even bother?
The problem here is that people learn about this stuff, but frequently they learn about it too late. Could I
Mm-hmm.
tell one other anecdote which I think illustrates this
Definitely.
perfectly? When I was at Gartner, I got a call from a company who shall remain nameless. I'll tell you later. But they were a startup company. They were growing very rapidly, and their boss said you need to get an ERP program. So they went and looked at all the ERP programs, and their boss said, "Oh, these suck. We'll just write our own." So, in about 10 months, they wrote their own ERP program, which was very fast. I was very impressed. And they said, well, here's the problem. Whenever we have to make a change in the data schema, we have to bring the database down. By the way, they picked the wrong database. There are databases you don't have to do that, but they didn't get one of those. Okay. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, so how often do you do that? They said, oh, once a week. I said, maybe you should have taken 11 months to do this and thought about this in advance. And because they were crippled. They were crippled operationally. By the way, something which is interesting and may help here is this new trend towards creating teams who are responsible for applications for their entire life cycle. Because a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
data stuff happens down the road.
Yep.
When you're developing and testing, it's not a problem. You control everything. Once you get out there in the wild, things happen you didn't expect and they affect your data, and that affects everything.
Yep.
So look, it's going to be a slow process. The other thing, of course, is, I mean, we've all heard this talking to end users. I only go to IT when I want to slow things down. I mean, which is, they just have no appreciation of what IT does.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way with developers and database folks.
Yeah,
Look, they should benefit each other. Developers should be able to reuse the productivity built into data to make their job faster and easier as well.
Yep.
By the way,
Yep.
maintenance too. That's very, very important. So it's going to take some time. And I think one thing that's really important is to convince upper management of the need for this realignment to take place. Because,
Yep.
look, I'm a developer, I'm in my silo. Just like you said, John, it's not my job. I'm in my silo. I actually don't care. I don't get paid for that. I don't get bonuses. I don't get promotions. Okay. But up above, if it doesn't work, it kind of doesn't matter whose fault it is anymore. It just has to be fixed.
Yeah.
I think AI is going to put a lot of pressure on this because
Oh yeah.
of the nature of those applications. They just, I like to say, agents are hungry for data, and they don't care where it is. They don't care what the governance is. Just give me the data because I got to come up with an answer. And once people start to crack open their core data stores to feed agents, I think that's gonna result in some changes. We have yet to really understand what those
Yeah.
will be, but you can't you can't just
Yeah.
continue. We can't just
A- a-
continue on the way we've been going.
Agents don't even understand the concept of governance. I mean,
Yeah.
it's outside
Mhm.
their scope. And I mean, sometimes I'll talk to people and they'll kind of have an inkling about this hallucinations. Like, it's not a hallucination. I mean, that's not a bug, that's a feature, you know? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
it's not going to go away. It might get better, but personally, as a data guy, by the time it gets better, you'll have spent more time and put more work into doing it than you could have by doing it in a traditional method to start with.
Yeah, yeah, yep. Anyway, I think we've just sort of cracked open the door here, and I think probably the moral of the story is maybe we should try and take on an easier problem like solve world hunger. But anyway, this really opens the path for our next episode, where we're going to take a look at how some of the new technologies, basically language models, vibe coding, agents. How does that change all this? Starting from from the issue that of course we've already solved, but really haven't. So I'm looking forward to our next episode.
Thanks, Tony. This is real
Okay,
Thank you,
fun.
Tony.
good
Thanks,
talk.
Matt.
everyone. Thanks,
Yeah.
John and
Bye-bye.
Rick, for joining us.